I'm Eric Davis with Conservation Nebraska, uh, based here in Kearney, and we are going to have Katy Ayers talk about mushrooms and how they are the original recyclers of our planet, as the title suggests, and some neat things that she and the Nebraska Mushroom have done, collaborated with, and done with mushrooms here in Nebraska. So I'm going to have Katy take it away. I'm going to mute myself. And all panelists are muted, or everyone else is muted. We just feel free to ask questions in the Q&A chat box, and we'll answer those at the end uh, of the series. And there will be a short survey at the end as well when you log out of this uh, to give us a little bit of feedback. So thank you guys, and here's Katy.
Hello, everyone. My name's Katy Ayers, like he said. I'm an environmental and sustainability intern at Central Community College, and I'm probably most well known now for growing a boat out of mushrooms. But today I really want to focus on how fungi really helped our planet take off and greened up our entire environment. These are a few mushrooms that I found in some moss, actually just yesterday. Just add that in there for fun. First off, most people have a misunderstanding. The actual body of a fungus is mycelium, which are these white root-like fibers that you see on the screen in front of you. Their mycelium is made up of these little hyphae, which are the individual strings you see going across there. And like humans, they create enzymes to digest their food, but unlike us, the world is their stomach. So they digest nutrients outside of their body and then actually absorb it, which is really cool. They're breaking down a lot of materials that would normally just pile up without them, like decaying logs and all sorts of organic matter, animals, plants, even humans. This is another picture of mycelium. This is more of a matted one. They come in lots of different sizes, colors, and textures. This is yet another one with a little inky cap at the bottom. And I just thought that the orange fuzzy was really cool on this particular type. So this is a wine cap mushroom, and wine cap mushrooms are also known as garden giants. They're really great for your yard, and they unlock nutrients that your plants need to develop properly. So you can actually inoculate your gardens with certain types of mushrooms to boost your plant potential and increase the total biomass of your garden. We planted these in our pollinator garden last summer, and our plants just exploded. It was amazing. We had black-eyed Susans that were about 5 feet tall, so they're very impressive. This is also an edible mushroom. It's a cousin to the button mushroom, but they're much larger and very savory and delicious. Garden giants spend their time digesting nutrients, but they also love to eat bacteria like E. coli. So imagine if we were able to create swales in the ground and fill that with organic material for the wine caps to eat, specifically around feedlots. Feedlots, we have a ton of them, but that runoff is full of coliforms and bad bacteria that we don't want in our water sources. By creating a diversion where they have to go through this mycelial network, we could actually reduce the amount of coliforms in our water. Here are some wine caps that we actually spread at parks across Kearney, Grand Island, and Hastings. So if you're over by Hall County Park or Yanni Park, or out in the pollinator garden in Hastings CCC campus, you might just come upon some of these guys. I've learned a lot of what I know through books. So Mycorrhizal Planet, Teaming with Fungi, and Organic Mushroom Farming and Mycoremediation are the main sources for all of my information in this video or presentation. The first one I want to start with is mycorrhizal fungi, because these ones are the fungi that are growing in the soil and actually doing a lot more of the work than we would expect, and they don't always form mushrooms like most. So these These fungi actually form relationships around the roots of plants. 95% of terrestrial plants make these sort of relations. The plant will take up energy through photosynthesis and actually create sugars specific for the fungi. They use up to 75% of their energy converting sugars they use into sugars that the fungi can use. And the fungi in turn provide them with phosphorus, nitrogen, calcium, and other nutrients that they might need. They also can help sort of solidify where your pH is sitting. So if you had an appropriate mix of mycorrhizal fungi in your garden, you could adjust your pH. And this was actually my experiment with mycorrhizal fungi. I had put some in a tarp with some animal bedding, and it actually made this bird seed that was mixed in there sprout through my tarp and grew into the ground. So all I did was I took old nylon and filled it with some rice and soaked it in water overnight. Then I took it out by the riverbank in the tree area and actually buried it and left it there for 1 week. When I came back, it was full of white mycelium growing so beautifully. It smelled a little earthy and interesting. And I took that back and put it in this tarp, and this was the result. Since then, I used that as a fertilizer for my mom's yard, and she was unable to grow grass before because she had a very compacted, possibly polluted yard, and now we're actually seeing full coverage of grass over the whole thing, which is really nice. So we can take the mycorrhizae that are growing in areas like this and use them to make our gardens more like this and this. This is a chlorophyllum molybdite mushroom. They're also known as vomiters. You find these in your yard a lot. They're a white mushroom that can grow to be very, very large, but they actually produce green spores. It's kind of hard to see from this picture because of the lighting, but they were a mint green color. Oh, and this is actually a picture of how I do my spore prints. This is just the cap of the mushroom sitting on a black piece of paper, and then you leave it there for 2 hours, and it releases spores onto the paper that you can actually see and use to identify the mushrooms that you're finding in your yard to find out if they're beneficial or not. Here's some more pictures of how I do my mushroom prints. I'll find a few different kinds in a day and then spread them out on a paper. And sometimes they turn out really well, and sometimes they kind of turn into this. So those were inky caps, and when they disintegrate, they literally turn into like a black ink. I think it'd be really cool to do some paintings or something with those, off topic, but you can actually use these spore prints and tear them up and throw them back into your yard, bury them under a little mulch, and actually grow more mushrooms from your mushrooms. You can also use just the fruiting body and break that up and throw it into your yard, and that works just as well. Sometimes I just do a few, and sometimes I do a lot. Here was a really good one I got from my yard the other day. It was from a pinealus mushroom, or a little brown mushroom. And the book I'm using for all of my IDing is Mushrooms and Other Fungi of the Mid-Continental United States. Notice every time I find a mushroom, I put a sticky note in there and I make a little note with where I found it and sort of my nickname for it. So I found a lot of mushrooms and brought them back to my yard. One of the most favorites and well-known probably would be a morel, like this blonde morel. I've done a few experiments with them trying to get them to grow in the yard, but they're also a symbiotic mushroom, so they're making relationships with specific trees and grasses. Large apple trees, elm trees, particularly dead elm trees, maple, and a couple other, I can't remember them all right now, but as you're searching through the forest, you might see these every once in a while, particularly in the spring. This is another mushroom I found and brought back to my yard. So I go out and I find all of these fungi everywhere, and I bring them back, I spore print them, and then I spread them in my mom's yard. So far, she's a willing participant in this, and it's actually showed us a lot of improvements. We've had them growing in flower pots from the ground, from logs I've brought home, and our yard looks so much better. I wish I had a before and after picture of it, but I didn't do that. Here's another picture of some that we found at Hall County Park. And these mushrooms, you can tell that they're saprophytic, which means that they're a decomposer. So these are the ones doing the hard work, the heavy lifting of breaking down all that cellulose in this bark. And as they break down the bark, they're releasing more and more nutrients, breaking it closer and closer down to a nice, healthy soil. They're a vital part of our soil food web, which includes bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all sorts of good stuff. The ground is alive beneath us, and most of us don't even notice. When you step through the woods, you can actually be stepping on, like, I think the number was 300 square feet of mycelium in one step, because it's beneath the soil about 18 inches, and so it grows for that whole foot and a half underneath everywhere that you step. It's incredible. They come in all sizes, big and small. These ones were little and yellow and about the size of my pinky. I picked a few of them and actually spread them to another corner of the park. I don't always make it home with all of them. This is a picture of a couple different kinds of lichens. They're actually a fungi-algal mix, and these work on the bark on the outside of the mushroom. They work together, so the algae is going through photosynthesis and using light to make energy for them. And then the fungi is actually what is attaching it to the branch. So it holds it in place and gives it a spot where it can actually do photosynthesis. Here's a few more mushrooms from the weekend. These ones, so when I take a picture of a mushroom, I always take a picture of its habitat and the cap in the first picture, and then the second picture is always the gills. Sometimes when you're looking, you won't even see gills on the bottom, and that can tell you that it's not even a mushroom. There are lots of different kinds of fruiting bodies. Some have gills, pores, there's even ones with teeth, and some have no gills at all. They're jelly fungi. They're very interesting. Here's another one that was very surprising to me, and when I picked it, it was a lot longer than I thought. It was kind of hiding in the sand by the river. This one also made it a little bit farther down the river, and one of the stories I wanted to share is one of Paul Stamets. He actually bought some land, and the EPA came and said that he needed to trade out his septic system, but he didn't want to pay that money to get that done. So he created a runoff section where all of his water would come through and go through the wine cap spawn. And that actually cleaned his water for him. And when they came out to check again 2 years later to make sure everybody had complied, he did not change his septic system, but the water near his home was actually cleaner than other people's who had gone the extra mile and paid for that septic system and had it placed. So there's a lot that we can do just by this. And once they fruited, he actually used the mushroom caps, which had a bunch of bugs in them, and he would throw them out into the water where they grow salmon, stock salmon, and the salmon would actually hit the mushroom and make the bugs fall out. So you could use it to clean your water and then to feed your fish afterward. It looks like a little piece of bubble gum stuck to the log, but it's actually a slime mold. Slime molds are really deceiving because they have the word mold in them, so you'd think they're a fungi. Usually, most of the time, they're parasitic, so if they're on a live tree, they will eventually kill it. These ones are one of my favorite. It's called wolf's milk. So when you poke this little pink thing, it will explode with pink goo. But if you let them harden, they turn brown, and then you can pop them and a burst of spores come out. You would be surprised at how many spores are in the air around us all the time. Spores are part of the particulates that water forms around in the sky to make clouds. So spores can go from one side of the earth all the way across the ocean and land somewhere else. The spread of them is very wide, especially if they get the height that they need to be caught by the wind. This is a Cortinarius mushroom. You can tell because of the slight spider web on the picture on the right. It's not actually a spider web. They have this web that holds their gills in while they form, and then it opens up so that they can release their spores. If you see a mushroom with a webbing like this, please never eat it. I really like the color of this one though, so I still wanted to take a picture. I started doing all of this last January. So January 2019, I found this mushroom on the right, and obviously it's old and kind of gross. It was dried out on a log, and I ripped it off and brought it home. Then I put it in some cardboard that I soaked in water and into a couple of Tupperwares. After just 1 week, it was growing like crazy. The picture on the left is just after 2 days, and then on the right is after 1 week. I was really hoping that these were oyster mushrooms, but I really wasn't sure. So I just let it keep growing, and once it hit this point where it started to get an orange coloration, that's actually from the exudates it makes, or the digestive juices, and that meant that it was getting close to degrading most of that, and it's probably ready to try and fruit it. So I built what's known as a shotgun fruiting chamber. You can make one of these at home very easily. You get a storage tote and then drill holes in it and fill the bottom with perlite that you've moistened with water. Then place your blocks that you've grown with your cardboard and mycelium inside of there and just monitor the humidity. You can put another tote around it if it gets too dry. But in the first week, I had these little guys starting, so I was getting very hopeful. But they looked so strange, I had no idea what they were. These little star-like mycelium. And then they turned to tentacles. And the little droplets of juice that you see toward the top there, that's called guttation, and that's more of those digestive enzymes coming out. It's enzymes in water, so they are putting off a lot of water also. After I moved it outside, I saw a lot better growth from the mushrooms. They looked more like a regular mushroom. And this picture on the right is when I knew that I actually had an oyster mushroom. I let it keep growing, and I ended up being able to get a small side of mushrooms to eat. I did make sure that I used cardboard that didn't have any ink on it, just to be safe. But you can use this technique in your garden too. But imagine it a different way. So you would lay cardboard on the bottom to sort of drown out your weeds, and then on top a layer of either more cardboard, or you could use hay or wood chips, whatever organic material you have around. Lay that across, then a layer of either fruiting bodies that you've ripped apart, or maybe some mycelium from another part of your yard, because you're bound to see mycelium growing if you have wood chips in your yard, and you can actually just spread those across your yard to improve your growth. And then each year you just layer on top of that, creating more and more soil, more and more composting, and just increasing your soil food web tenfold, I'm sure. This is the spoil as an oyster mushroom. After I did this, I scooped a few up, put it on a microscope slide to make sure that the spore size was right. I did have to go buy a microscope so that I could do this at home, but it was worth the investment for me. This is what I currently do my culturing in. So I bring my mushroom home, and this is called a still air box. It's another tote that I cut armholes in, and I'll clean the entire inside with rubbing alcohol and then put them on what's known as agar media, which is in these petri dishes. You can use a fruit body or spores or other mycelium to make these samples, and then you use them to inoculate grain, and then eventually your wood chips or whatever organic material you want to use. This is just another way to start. It's a little bit higher tech, but still low tech enough for anybody to do. And you could actually get wild edible mushrooms, culture them in your room, wherever you want, and then grow them in your yard so that you have them right outside. You could go out after a rain and pick a wine cap mushroom for dinner, or a pheasant back, or a chicken of the woods. The options are really endless with this kind of stuff. It's so fun. There's over 1.5 million different types of fungi, scientists believe. That's an estimate, a conservative estimate. And these fungi, we only know 150,000 of 1.5 million. So that leaves what, 1.35 million left to be discovered. So we may have seen mushrooms that have never been discovered or described anytime, and we wouldn't even know it because it just goes under the radar for so many people. But if more of us were to be aware of what they're doing and how we can use them, it would just be awesome. I don't know how else to describe it. So we've gone over that. This is one of the projects that Ash, as he's in the picture there, he's the owner and operator of Nebraska Mushroom. These are some we've already fruited. For the front ones that are covered in white are oyster mushrooms that have been fruited for almost a year, and the ones in the back that are darker are shiitake blocks. All of these have different uses. Like shiitakes have been shown to degrade heavy metals. They also are a great fertilizer, and worms love to eat this stuff. So if you want worms, plant some more shiitakes. The oyster mushrooms have been shown to degrade PAHs, so polyaromatic hydrocarbons. These are carbons that are in rings and really, really hard for us to break down. So these guys can break down like BPA plastics and other ones that are, oh, I can't think of any of the other ones right now, but PAHs. There's also the king oyster mushroom, which they've shown can degrade Agent Orange. That's just crazy to me that these mushrooms can be used to break down some of the most dangerous chemicals in our world. And they're right there for us to use. It's so close, but so far. So this picture, we went out to Prairie Pines Farm in Lincoln. We used all these oyster mushroom blocks to help plant in the food forest. They're planting many different plants out there, and we're inoculating it so that as these plants grow, they'll have food from these mycelium blocks, and they'll hopefully grow and expand and just create a very supple, rich soil that will produce food for us for years to come, us and the community. This is a before picture, so hopefully in 3 or 4 years, we'll have a really nice green flowering area to show. The next project that I'm working on, so obviously I love to build materials out of mushrooms. This is a picture of one of the bee hotels that we've created. For the bee hotels, I wrote a grant proposal to Nebraska Environmental Land and Trust, and this is a PI grant, Public Information and Education grant. My advisor was able to go over it with me and help me with the budgeting, and we were awarded this grant, so we'll have $3,000 to put out these mycelium bee hotels, and then we'll study them and see how many bees are coming, whether they have a preference for the traditional hotel versus this mycelium hotel. We're gonna see, I guess I forgot a main point. So the mushroom that I grew this out of is called a reishi mushroom. It's the mushroom of immortality in China. That's what they've known it as for over 200 years. It's in ancient Chinese medical books. And so it's been used as an immune booster, an anti-inflammatory, very beneficial to humans. Recently, at Washington State University, they started a study where they're actually feeding exudates of this mushroom to honeybees. And the bees' immune system has been boosted enough to be able to ward off the varroa mite, which causes a disease that actually can cause colony collapse disorder. That is a very important thing because colonies are collapsing all over the world, and there's 3 options that it could be, and one of them is this virus that the mite causes. The virus is deformed wing virus, and it causes their wings to shrivel. So they go from being able to forage for 9 days, maybe 10 days, down to just 4. So their lifetime and their working ability is cut in half. This makes it very hard for the colony to survive. But we're focusing on solitary bees, which are our native bees that are doing actually more of the pollination than we would expect. So native bees do a belly flop onto the flowers, and they get the pollen all over their stomachs and carry it with them to each flower after that. So they're getting more pollen transfer each time they land. Honeybees have a pollen sac on their back legs, and they carry their pollen on those, so not as much as getting cross-pollinated in the process. Up to 80% of the foods that we eat are pollinated by solitary bees. And some crops, like alfalfa, have to have a specific bee to pollinate them because the flower on the alfalfa plant is closed and it actually has a trigger that pops the plant open to get to the pollen. But the bee has to be able to withstand that little hit that it gets. If I'm not wrong, those are called leafcutter bees, and watching a little bee get hit by that flower is so cute and hilarious. I would definitely suggest watching that. So beyond the soil boosting and myco products, we can also use mycelium for pest controls. Specifically like ants and other things, there are certain fungi like cordyceps, you might have heard of those. They will parasitize the insect that you don't want. So you can, if there's an insect in your yard that's really causing you harm, like Japanese beetles. So these were ravaging our garden last summer. I crawled around on the ground on my hands and knees searching for a beetle that had been killed by a fungus, essentially. I found a few that had mycelium growing on them, like a wispy spiderweb-like look to them, and took them back and actually cultured them. So we have a culture of this fungus that was growing on a beetle, and now our next step is to make a liquid inoculant. To inoculate just means to use a tiny bit of the mycelium or the spores and spread it over a large area. You're basically expanding the organism. So you put it into water and then you spray your garden, and then hopefully it's the right type of fungus and it will target all of those insects, and then you won't have a problem. We are lucky so far, fingers crossed, we haven't seen any Japanese beetles yet, so hopefully. Let me check here. The other topic I wanted to touch on real quick is just remediation. That just means cleaning up pollutants. Like I said, they can clean up Agent Orange, PAHs, oyster mushrooms have been shown to clean up oil spills. So all of these, we could literally be placing them preemptively around places in order to clean up our environment before anything happens. Imagine being able to put mycelium around the Keystone XL pipeline so that if oil were to spill, there would be a barrier there that could help hold it in and degrade it before it were to cause too much damage to plants and animals around it. And this could be a very, how do I want to say it? It could be very useful in bringing our world back to more of a regenerative environment, where we actually work to regenerate our environment and make it cleaner, greener, and more beneficial to every living creature. It takes a collaboration of people, animals, plants, to be able to make our life work. It's almost like a mycelial network because it takes all of these connections and these relationships to be able to build what we want to see in the world. And so I have one more presentation to show, and this is just how I built the my canoe, in case anyone's here for that. And just pictures again. This is me in the boat on my second outing. I was so happy. So the my canoe is actually still growing. It's an 8-foot canoe made entirely of reishi mushrooms, or mushroom mycelium, and it fruits the mushrooms after I take it out of the water and bring it back. So it's really cool. I started off with this, I got oak lattice, and then I actually built a homemade wood steamer. I used a downspout and 2 rodent guards with some high temperature waterproof tape on the ends, and then drilled a hole to put my wood steamer that I bought for like $60 on Amazon in there, and then made a little rack for my lattice to sit on so it wouldn't get too wet. And I'd leave it in there and then bend it to shape. I did do a lot of math to be able to get the shape correct, and I used screws to hold it in place while the glue dried. But when I took those screws out, it had little holes, so I was hoping the mycelium would grow through that and make it even stronger. Next, I wrapped it in concrete spacers and then some plastic so that I could do paper mache, because I looked into fiberglassing, injection molding, making a plastic mold, making a plaster mold, and none of those seemed like a good option. So paper mache was where I was at. So I went back to second grade and did like 60 hours of paper macheing so that I could have a mold. I actually covered this mold with a truck bed liner spray in an aerosol form. I thought that that would keep the mycelium from growing through it. Since it's paper, obviously it's cellulose, the mycelium will want to eat this. Another good option for throwing in your yard if you want more fungi food. So we got that ready. We put it in a hammock to make it more stable and to actually keep the right shape that we wanted so that it would float right in the water. What you see there, I made the paper mache just a little too short, so I had to use some other pieces of paper to hold it in place essentially and do the top part of it. So we put in, what's in there is ground pallet wood that's already been mixed with mycelium. And so this is the bottom part. We put in another side and then packed it all the way up and duct taped it. And it hung there for 1 week, and then we undid it because it was actually growing through my hammock. It grew through the paper mache. It was trying to grow into the straps that were holding it up. So we had to take it out. We let it keep growing though because it was just this white color, and as you can see, there's still a couple brown spots on there. As it started growing, it made these really intricate patterns and beautiful colors and started forming mushrooms. Those little bumps over there are actually mushrooms forming on the left side, and on the right side, those are little pocks where the exudates were forming, or the digestive juices. After another week of growing, we put it outside to dry in the sun. This technique, I used it because I wanted the boat to still be alive. So that made it go into dormancy. It's still alive, but it's not growing. Every time I put it in the water, it starts growing again, fruits more mushrooms, and then I have to dry it out again. I'm hoping that this will make it last longer, because if it just kept growing, it would eventually just kind of fall apart. Most people who grow mycomaterials will actually heat their items up to 212 degrees to kill the mycelium, so it will stop growing forever. And since they're waterproof, because they form this skin with their mycelium, and the mycelium's outer wall is made of chitin. That's the same material that like crab shells, insect exoskeletons are. So it's waterproof, and it actually makes it to where it'll completely waterproof it. It's fireproof, it's antimicrobial, it's anti-static. There's so many uses for this stuff, I swear. After it dried, I took it to the fair and then took it out, and we've gone out 3 times now. Every time is super fun. I love taking it out. It weighs 100 pounds. When we first started, it actually weighed 204 pounds, so it lost almost half its weight in water. And after an hour of floating, I only gained 2 ounces of water weight. That just shows you how waterproof it is. And I believe that is all. See what questions.
Is there any questions out there? All right. Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you for all the next question here. To ask, what are all the signs to know if a mushroom is poisonous or not?
Um, well, there's a lot of mushrooms that are toxic and not poisonous, but there are a few that are poisonous. Unfortunately, if it is poisonous, it's one of those you probably won't know for 2 weeks after eating it, and then it's too late. So never, never, never eat a mushroom unless you're 110% sure you know what it is. I always go out, I make sure I find it fruiting at least 3 different times. So it could take me up to 3 years before I actually pick a mushroom to eat it. And getting a good field guide is going to be important, making sure you're checking your spore prints and all of these things. Very important.
There's another question here. Do you have or know of any health benefits of honeybees that mycelia could provide?
Um, from what I've read, when they did their studies, there were, I believe, 17 hives. Don't quote me on that. So they had their hives, they fed them these exudates, and then they had their control group. Compared to their control group, the rate of the virus went down 47-fold for the deformed wing virus, which is an incredible reduction of virus. And then for Lake Sinai virus, which we don't see in these parts, but over in Washington State and areas like that, there was a 27,000 reduction. Like it just wiped that virus out. The hope is that a native species of this reishi will help the native bees. So we're taking from the environment right here and putting it right back out there.
All right, that's all the questions. There was more. All right, just lots of thank yous and comment that is sweet.
Awesome.
All right, thank
It'll
you
be at
much.
the state fair again this year. So
All right, you'll be able to see it if you go to the state fair. Awesome.
yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, have a good night, everyone. Thank you again, Katie.
Thank you.